In just 2 weeks, a 700-year-old African empire was burned to the ground. Over, its king dragged away in chains, and its greatest treasures stolen and scattered across the world. But this was not the beginning of Benin's story. It was the end. To understand how an empire this powerful could fall, we have to go back over 1,000 years. To the beginning. Imagine a city so vast and so orderly that when European visitors first laid eyes on it in the late 1400s, they swore it was greater than Lisbon. Imagine walls stretching for thousands of miles, dug by hand over centuries, forming the largest network of earthworks ever built by human hands before the age of machines. Imagine a kingdom so wealthy in bronze and ivory that its art would one day be locked behind glass in the world's greatest museums. Torn from its homeland in a single, brutal week. This is the story of the Benin Kingdom, a West African empire that built one of the most sophisticated civilizations history has ever seen, and paid a devastating price for its glory. Long before Europeans ever set foot on its shores, the land that would become the Benin Kingdom was ruled by a mysterious line of kings called the Ajaizo, the kings of the sky. For centuries, they governed the Edo people. From a kingdom already old, already structured, already proud. But by the late 1100s, the Ajaizo dynasty had collapsed into chaos. The nobles of Benin, desperate for stability, sent word east to the city of Ife, asking the great Yoruba ruler there to send them a prince who could restore order. The prince who answered, Oranmiyan, found the kingdom too difficult to rule alone and eventually left. But not before fathering a son with a local woman. That son, Ueka, became the first Oba of Benin around the year 1180. Founding a royal dynasty that would rule for more than 700 years and counts a living Oba on the throne even today. For nearly 2.5 centuries, the new dynasty grew. But it was one man who would transform Benin from a regional kingdom into a feared and respected empire. His name was Oba Uyuer, and history remembers him as Uyuer the Great. He came to power around 1440 after a brutal struggle for the throne. And what he built afterward changed everything. Uyuer reorganized the entire city, carving it into wards and guilds, each with its own purpose, its own craft, its own place in the great machine of the kingdom. He ordered the construction of massive defensive walls and deep moats encircling the capital. Earthworks so extensive that when combined with the rural walls built by later generations across the wider kingdom, they stretched for thousands of miles. More earth moved than the Great Pyramid of Giza, more than any single ancient construction project on the continent. He launched military campaigns that pushed Benin's borders outward, swallowing rival territories and turning tribute into wealth. By the time Uyuer died, Benin was no longer just a kingdom. It was an empire. Picture Benin City in its golden age, somewhere around the late 1400s and 1500s. A Portuguese explorer named Duarte Pacheco Pereira walked its streets and could barely believe what he saw. Broad avenues stretched in straight lines as far as the eye could see, wide enough for 10 men to walk shoulder to shoulder. Houses stood in orderly rows, their walls polished to a deep red shine, their roofs thatched with palm leaves cut so precisely they looked sculpted. At the heart of the city stood the royal palace, a sprawling complex covering acres of lands, decorated with bronze plaques that gleamed in the sun, telling stories of war, of kings, of gods. The streets were kept so clean that visitors compared them favorably to the great cities of Europe. This was not a village. This was one of the largest, most carefully planned cities on Earth. Centuries before European cities like London had organized sewage systems or paved streets. But Benin's true treasure was not its walls or its avenues. It was its art. Hidden within the palace grounds lived a guild unlike any other. The Igan, the bronze casters of Benin. Sworn into royal service and forbidden from working for anyone but the Oba himself. Using a technique called lost wax casting, passed down through generations in absolute secrecy. These artists transformed melted brass and bronze into objects of staggering beauty. They cast commemorative heads to honor dead kings. Their faces serene and powerful, crowned with coral beads. They cast hundreds of plaques depicting warriors in battle, musicians, Portuguese traders with their strange long noses and rigid postures, leopards prowling in symbolic representation of royal might. Because in Benin, the leopard was the king of the bush, just as the Oba was the king of men. Every object carried meaning. Every casting was a record, a history book made of metal because Benin had no written script. And so its art became its memory. The kingdom's power did not rest on art and architecture alone. It rested on the courage of its people. And few embody that courage more than a woman named Idia. In the early 1500s, the kingdom of Ida threatened to invade Benin. During the reign of Oba Esigi, Idia, Esigi's mother, did not stay behind the palace walls. She gathered intelligence, organized warriors, and is remembered as a fierce strategist who helped her son crush the invasion and save the kingdom. In gratitude, Esigi created an entirely new royal title in her honor. Ioba Queen Mother, a position of immense political power that had never existed before. Idia's image would later be carved into ivory masks of such elegance that one of them became a global symbol of African heritage. Displayed centuries later at the FESTAC Arts Festival and still recognized around the world today. Through the 1500s and 1600s, Benin stood as a dominant force along the West African coast. It traded ivory, pepper, and palm oil with Portuguese merchants. In exchange for coral beads, a material so prized that only the Oba could authorize its use. And brass manillas, a currency in the shape of bracelets, that the Igan Iranwan Guild melted down to feed the kingdom's endless appetite for art. Foreign ambassadors traveled to Benin not as conquerors, but as guests. Awed by a civilization that seemed to have mastered governance, warfare, art, and trade all at once. But empires, no matter how magnificent, are not invincible. By the late 1800s, the British Empire had set its sights on Benin's wealth and its refusal to bow to colonial trade demands. In January 1897, a British delegation attempting to enter the city during a sacred festival was ambushed and killed. An act Britain used as justification for what came next. Weeks later, a British military force launched what became known as the Punitive Expedition. Thousands of soldiers descended on Benin City, burning it to the ground. The palace, the homes, the centuries of accumulated history. All of it consumed by fire. The Oba Ovenramwen was captured and exiled to Calabar, where he would die years later, never allowed to return to the throne his ancestors had held for 700 years. In the smoking ruins, British soldiers discovered something they had never expected. Thousands of bronze and ivory artworks of extraordinary craftsmanship, far beyond what they imagined a West African kingdom capable of producing. Rather than honoring what they found, they looted it. Plaques, heads, masks, and altarpieces, an estimated several thousand pieces, were seized and shipped to Britain. Many sold off to fund the cost of the expedition itself. These objects, now known to the world as the Benin Bronzes, ended up scattered across museums in London, Berlin, New York, and beyond. Displayed for over a century as the spoils of conquest rather than the cultural inheritance of a living people. Today, the Benin Kingdom still exists. Its royal throne still occupied. Its traditions still observed in the heart of Edo State, Nigeria. And after more than 100 years, the world has slowly begun to reckon with what was taken. Museums in Germany, the United States, and elsewhere have started returning Benin Bronzes to their rightful home. A process still unfolding today. What the fires of 1897 could not destroy was the genius behind the bronze, the discipline behind the walls, and the memory of a kingdom that once stood as proof that African civilizations built empires, mastered art, and shaped history on their own extraordinary terms. The walls have crumbled, the palace has been rebuilt many times over. But the legacy of Benin endures in every plaque, every mask, every fragment of bronze still finding its way home.